Joining me now is Democratic Congressman from the state of Connecticut, Congressman Jim Hines. Thank you very much for being here. It's been a long time. This bill does cover a lot of ground, a lot of big wins for the Democratic Party on climate change, on taxes, on health care. But it does kind of feel like those things were rebranded into the Inflation Reduction Act, that title that doesn't necessarily coincide with what this act is going to do. In fact, the CBO says it will not significantly change inflation over the next 2 years. So what do you say to that?
Well, I guess what I'd say to that, Katie, and thank you for having me back. Inflation is actually a fairly complicated topic. We talk about core inflation. We talk about this kind of inflation, change of CPI over time. Here's one thing that I know. When I have a town hall meeting in southwestern Connecticut, I don't have that meeting, but some senior citizen comes up to me and says, I can't afford insulin. I can't afford my prescription drug. Inflation means something to people on the ground that is maybe different than what it means to economists. And what this bill will do, and I'm 100% confident that we're going to pass it in the next hour or so, it will, for the first time ever, allow Medicare to negotiate with the big drug companies using their heft to negotiate volume discounts, which, of course, is exactly what Ford Motor Company and any big buyer of anything does, in a way that will cause the cost of those prescription drugs to go down. And it will put a cap of $2,000 on the out-of-pocket expenses that senior citizens, and remember, we're talking about people on fixed income here, that it'll put a cap on their out-of-pocket expenses. So, again, we could have a 2-hour conversation about the nature of the CPI and everything, but this is going to reduce drug prices for senior citizens.
Fair, but inflation does have an actual definition. Why not just call it the It's Going to Make Your Life Cheaper Act, if that's the case?
That's just a lot of words. Well, no, I mean, Katie, look, if we're really dealing in the world of reality here, you and I both know that inflation is largely managed by the Federal Reserve, and that at this point, I mean, we could dramatically slash spending in this country. That's a whole other conversation. That would be, as the economists say, the fiscal side. We could, that would be a conversation about, do we cut Social Security? Do we cut Medicare the way the Republicans have proposed, or do we cut defense spending? But really right now, as we sit here, most of the action in fighting inflation is going to be at the Federal Reserve. And we're already starting to see their actions take effect. As we saw in the last month, no increase month on month of inflation for American consumers. Do
you think that this bill, along with all the other stuff that's going on within the Democratic Party, helps you guys in the midterms? Do you see a noticeable change in momentum?
No question about it, Katie. Coming on top of the passage of the PACT Act, which, of course, was the aid to burn pit wounded veterans, which was signed into law last week, coming on top of the CHIPS Act, which is going to onshore a lot of the semiconductors that right now is very hard to get from Asia. Right now, if you tuned into the debate in the House floor, Republicans can't argue against cutting prices for prescription drugs for seniors. They want to, but it's hard for them to argue against making an investment against the devastation caused by climate change. So instead, they're focused on, for a party that claims to be the party of law and order, they're focused on the element that would provide the IRS with a lot more essentially auditors to catch the tax cheats. And Katie, you know this, but there are estimates that every year the United States fails to receive $400, $500, $600 billion in tax revenue because people cheat. So that's what my Republican colleagues are focused on right now. Why they would want to sort of make it easier for people to cheat on their taxes is beyond me, but here we are.
Talk about taxes. The carried interest loophole was not closed. President Biden was the third president to campaign on closing it. That would have raised a ton of money from people at the very, very tippy top who are making a ton of money off of something that should not be taxed as a capital gain, as a lot of people out there argue. So how do you feel about this not making it in?
Katie, I am not over my outrage right now. And I would submit to you that there aren't members of Congress who represent maybe more people who are involved in private equity and hedge funds
than you
than I do.
Yeah.
And giving a preferential tax rate for the capital gains on money that is not theirs is beyond absurd. It serves no public purpose, and as they will tell you in many instances, it's deeply, deeply unfair. Now, the one thing I would take issue with, it wasn't actually a huge source of revenue for the bill. It was in the tens of billions of dollars, not in the hundreds of billions of dollars. But, I know Kyrsten Sinema. I respect Kyrsten Sinema. Next time I see her, I'm gonna have a bone to pick with her, because that should have been in this bill. Frankly, that's a better way to raise revenue than putting a 1% excise tax on stock repurchases. So I personally, and again, remember, I represent an awful lot of private equity and hedge fund people in the United States Congress. I'm really unhappy that was taken out of the bill.
Just go to Greenwich or New Canaan. Hey, how do you feel about the FBI's search of Mar-a-Lago? From what you understand so far, from what Merrick Garland said yesterday, do you think it's justified?
Well, I'm going to do something that too many of my colleagues are not doing, which is I'm going to wait for a single fact to come out on why they decided to do what they did. But two things are very clear, even though my Republican colleagues are trying to muddy the waters here. Number one, the president is not above the law. If the president broke the law, or if he retained classified documents that are out there creating a vulnerability to the national security of the United States, the FBI will have done the right thing. You don't get exempted from, legal process just because you're a big shot in this country. We're all equal before the law. But what we need to do right now is to wait for the facts to come out. Why a United States senator, or why the Republican leader of the House Republicans would jump to the conclusion that this was unfairly done? There's only one answer to that question, Katie, which is that you're trying once again to lick the boots of Donald Trump. And in this case, I get pretty animated about it, because people will die if they keep whipping up and encouraging violence. And in fact, somebody did die. A 42-year-old gave up his life yesterday because he was motivated by lies told by people who know that they are lying. And we've already had one fatality. And if they keep up this damaging of the credibility of the FBI, two things are going to happen. More violence, and eventually Americans, or at least half of Americans, are going to lose faith in the FBI and the Department of Justice. And these are entities that are made up of very patriotic people who risk their lives every day for the rule of law and to keep you and me safe.